Good morning. We are in the life class April 6, 2025. Once again, it's so good to be back with you all. We're here in our classroom in Nashville, having survived the floods and the storms and all the tornadoes that have hit us, and perhaps some of you listening out there, but it's nice to be back and safe. And just to remind you, we are in our series called Reparenting. And I'd like to start out with our ritual on our 3-4-5 breathing, if you all remember, to give you a chance just to relax here in our safe haven in the Bay Room. Make yourself comfortable with your feet on the floor, your body in your chair, your back against the chair particularly. Get acquainted with your space. Just try as best you can to be here, wherever you may be listening from. So, as you recall, we're going to be able to inhale on a count of 3, hold that breath for 4, and then very slowly exhale for 5. I'll do the first one with you. Here we go. Inhale for 3. Hold for 4. Exhale very slowly for 5. On count 2. Count 3, inhale, 3. Hold for 4. Exhale. Let's do one more. Just allow your hands to hang or rest in your lap. Feel the quiet. Allow your shoulders to drop back a little bit. Feel your feet heavy, 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 rooted to the ground. Take another deep breath. When you're ready, gently open your eyes. No hurry. And allow me to bless you with a Sabbath prayer, a Sabbath blessing. You may be of some faith, great faith, or no faith, but either way, may this bring peace to your heart. And may this day bring Sabbath rest to your heart and to your home. May God's image in me be restored, and may my imagination in God be restored. May the gravity of material things be lightened, and the relativity of time slow down. May I know grace to embrace my own finite smallness in the arms of God's infinite greatness. May God's word feed me and His Spirit lead me during this hour of discovery and into the week beyond and into this life to come. Amen. And so we have a class today that continues on reparenting and continues on getting to know our inner child. And today's title is called The Protectors. And so, many of us grew up without any protectors or feeling like we had any protectors. And so this class is about how we had to invent our own protectors. And our brains have incredibly inventive and cunning and creative ways of coming up with protectors. And so my aim this morning is to show you how we came up with those as children and how we still have them in place. I've attempted to draw a little diagram. For those of you who are listening, you can imagine a little flip chart, and I'll do my best to explain that to you as I go along. Hopefully, as when we get our YouTube channel up, we'll have a little picture of that. But basically, what I want to do is just to give you a perspective. Think about a little infant, think about a little baby, how adorable when they first come into the world. Like they're just this precious, pure little clean slate. Now, I know that there were many of you who may have never thought this way. Maybe you were indoctrinated with the philosophy or doctrine of original sin. And that's just fine. I'm not here to debate any kind of religion. I'm not particularly a religious person, but I do not hold with that. I do hold with coming into this world as a precious child of God. And I believe that it is our trauma and our layers of methods of coping and adapting, these layers over us that bring us pain and our methods of suffering. So the clean slate would be like a natural desire, a tendency to love, to trust, to be authentic, and to connect. So that little clean slate just instinctively trusts that it will be parented, that its basic needs will be met. But when we talk about reparenting our inner child, we're not talking about parenting this unwounded, undamaged little clean slate. When we talk about parenting ourselves, are we? We're talking about reparenting a child who has been damaged and who has been wounded and who has accrued all of these layers, right? For maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years even. So a lot of the tools to reparent that child will be very similar to parenting a child who comes in as a clean slate. Okay, some of the basic parenting ones, but then there's going to be a lot of additional tools needed to reparent this child who's damaged. I think about it when I go into Lowe's or Home Depot. Yeah, there's some basic little weeding tools that every parent, will need. But I got to move on into the high horsepower area. And some of the ones you might not normally use to work on my inner child, because I got some major gravel and major stones, to pry out of here. And I'm still working on a lot of mine. So let's take a look at what we've been looking at over the last couple of weeks about the inner child, which is that wounded child in all of us. And I am going to, when I send this out, again, send the March 16th on the 7 archetypes of the inner child, which were those adaptations that the brain makes to protect that inner child. And I'll just list these 7 like really quickly. You don't need to write these down, but it's just to kind of bring these to mind. I talked about the caretaker, the overachiever, the underachiever, the rescuer. There's one that's the life of the party, the yes person, the hero worshiper. There were a bunch of them, and some of them have different names, but these were kind of put out there a couple of weeks in one of my talks to you all. So if we take that a bit further today and we talk about them using the word adaptations, in other words, what does the brain create? What do we create as children to try to protect that sweet little inner child that gets wounded? So there are a lot of different things that have been given us by some amazing authors in recovery. I remember one of the first ones, I believe back in the 90s, I started reading some recovery books by Terry Real, and so did Tim Fletcher, who's the author of this material. We've had so many authors in common that we've loved because we both got into recovery at about the same time. And he also quotes Terry Real in terms of a model of three hearts. And I have attempted to just sort of basically put down some points here to help you see. Today I want to kind of just do like a big picture of kind of what the model is like. Terry Real talks about at the core there being this wounded inner child. And we've begun to cover this. But the inner child that's wounded develops between about 0 and 5 years old. That's pretty much early on, and that's the complex trauma when the damage is done. So this inner child is very sensitive, very vulnerable, but that's that powerless person that we've talked about, where they just feel like there's nothing that they can do. And that still remains inside of us at some point. So there's also this adaptive child, adaptations or archetypes right in here. And the whole focus of that is to protect the wounded child. So this is a mask that we begin to wear. It starts developing, 0 to 5, and then 6, 7, 8, 10, whatever that is, up. And so that's kind of wound around and protected like a cushion or a tire, around a center, in order not to damage that inner wounded child any further. And Terry Real, as an author, does a great job explaining this, how our brains just go into gear to try to protect that child so it adapts. Here's the thing that I think is so fascinating to understand about this. So as the brain goes into gear, what information in the environment would the brain have as guidelines or clues about what it should be like in order to protect the child? Well, think about it. Our brain would only have those authority figures around us in its current life. What would be the role model for that little brain? So typically, it might not have healthy to choose from. It's got its caretakers around, which are modeling what they came from. So it will pick adaptations that often resemble the very people who are abusing or ignoring or neglecting, let's say. So I want to show you how our inner critic develops. For example, how did I come up with this thing in my head that persecutes me? How did I come up with this thing in my head that drives me? I often wonder, I've been asked, how did you get that driver thing within you? Well, I look back at both my parents were superb workaholics, driven, right out of the Depression, driven. That was what I had around me as an only child for years to look at. This model really helps me understand, even though I work with this a lot, I always need to take a fresh look at this. So if the brain picks the adaptations that resemble the people that are around them, it might look to be very controlling. It might look to be very black and white if we grew up in a very rigid, controlling, or black and white. We might reach adulthood and be very black and white in our thinking and wonder why we are. How about if we're angry? How about if we tend to get very angry? What if we had an angry parent? What about unforgiving? Could be that we're very forgiving of others and very unforgiving of ourselves. What about being hard on ourselves? There's a lot of why questions that, if you look at this, make a lot of sense. So the adaptations, sadly, although they're about protecting, see, they're still so hard on the inner child. See what I mean? Should be protecting, but yet based on the information that they had to model, based on the very things that they didn't really need more of. Do you see? They needed other things, the opposite. They're based on the characteristics of the adult in the life of that child, and often very unhealthy. So when you look at 3 parts of the model that Terry Real puts out, the first part of that, just to go back and review, is this wounded child developing between 0 and 5. And then the second part would be the adaptive child whose whole focus is to protect. And then the third part of it would be where we are now, which would be the functional adult today getting healthy. That's why I say big picture. So you have 1, 2, and then where we are now. We're beginning to understand this and to look back at this and begin to go, wow, I have this within me. How incredible I'm able to see this precious core of innocent inner life, to have compassion, and to be able to see that all this stuff that I've done was just in order to protect myself. And I'm still doing some of the same old stuff, and it's not serving me really well. And glimmer of hope, there's some things I can do about it. I had a very young person I was talking with this last week, and she said, she asked me if I thought she would ever be able to forgive herself for the manipulations that she performed on other people. And I said, well, do you know what those are and why you did them? And I just explained a little bit of that. She goes, well, I guess I could now that I see what they are. I was just trying to stay alive, wasn't I? Just a little bit of information about what that function was turned the whole thing around for her. So when we're on the journey of recovery and we get information like in here, and we've got community, when we're in this whole life class family, every time you hear this and take it to heart, muse on it, get more information, you should be getting stronger and healthier as a functional adult, because you begin to feel a little bit more in charge of your life. So, healing this inner child takes a while and takes a commitment. Another thing Terry Real points out in his writings is that the problem child, the one who's the hardest to reparent, that can be the adaptive child. Because sometimes it's as though the person just leaves this and just comes in here into an adaptation form and says, I'm going to survive, and I don't ever want to get healthy. I don't want to be vulnerable. I will never be caring and nurturing, because those qualities are weaknesses. That's what got me in trouble in the first place. So it's very resistant to becoming healthy or authentic. Because if I ever go there again, that's going to make me vulnerable. Know that Tim Fletcher spent about 30 years in the prisons doing incredible work, and a lot of his personal experience with prisoners and this comes out of that, and I've learned a whole lot listening to him about why they became that way. You know, what complex post-traumatic stress syndrome does to someone. And it's because they were never able to feel safe and they had to go here and develop these maladaptive behaviors simply because of that. And so these are people that we've worked with correctly and can be made to feel safe. It wasn't really who they were. This was all about survival in the jungle. It's the adapted child that's going to cause us most of our issues in relationships. Because if we have a part of us that doesn't want to change because change equals getting hurt again, it's one of the trickiest things. I've been very open with you all in different points of my life where I've said to myself, I will never trust another person again. I will never be seen as weak again. And the problems that it has caused me in my life. So how do we reparent this adaptive child right here? So if a child doesn't attach, how does that with a caregiver, with the parent, doesn't attach? How does that affect them? How do they adapt? The first three are basically characteristics of both the wounded child and the adapted child. And I can certainly relate to these. What really happens, you know, if we don't attach successfully to someone out here? Well, shame is the big one. How did I get the shame that I have? This did not make sense to me at the beginning of recovery. Someone told me I had shame, and all of my reactions about wanting to just drop through the floor, my blood freezing and cracking, or feeling like having thoughts like I'm not good enough, nobody loves me, I'm not valuable, all my insecurities, never having felt like I fit in or belonged anywhere. And then there would be other people at treatment centers or groups where I was that would say the same thing. I would, you know, think, yeah, but how did I get it? These things really make sense to me today. And then I would ask, will people accept me? Will I get hurt again? So there's this constant cycle of stress inside me. So some people, the way that they have adaptations, and we've all seen different types of people. We can think about people that we have known. They take very different versions. Some people become very needy. Some people become very clingy. Some people act the opposite and they become very demanding. I want this, I need this, and they're very aggressive. So you go from one pole to the other. Some become very attention seeking. Some become very avoidant of everything. Some people totally isolate. You know, so in their mind, they're thinking, I won't get hurt if I'm not around people. If I'm not engaged in life. Other people, and kind of back to the antisocial prisoner, you know, as an extreme, nobody's ever going to hurt me again because I'm going to come hard. I'm not feeling. I'm going to shut down all my tender emotions. I'm not going to care about anything or anybody. I am, in effect, going to harden my conscience as though I do not have one. I'm going to harden my emotions. Here's another one. I'm not going to express my needs to anyone. And here's another one. I'm going to become self-sufficient so I don't need anybody. I'm going to become rebellious because as soon as you do what people want, that's when you get hurt. And that's a big motivator of rebellion. When you do what people want, that's when you get hurt. So I'm going to rebel against all authority. I'm just going to be angry and lash out. And that's the way I'm going to protect myself. I will use anger as a weapon and as a shield. Or I'm just going to lash out my pain by hurting others, by destroying property, by becoming a bully. Or, as we see so much in 20 years ago when we started seeing the phenomena of cutting and self-harm, even more with our adolescents, self-hurt, and certainly in the addictions, it's really hard for people in the throes of alcoholism, and I can relate to this because I have many years sober now, but it was very hard as I descended into that to see how I was hurting myself, you know, because that's how the mechanism of denial works. Or I'm going to be very ambivalent. I'm going to love mom one day, hate mom the next day, want to be with mom one day, not want to be with her the next day. Cold, love, hate in the same body. Very difficult to parent that particular child. And working with families like that, it's one of the saddest, most heartbreaking thing for the families who just cannot handle that kind of child. And then there may be someone who says, I need to be in control always. So there'll be intense control battles. I'm going to argue about everything. I'll be bossy, defiant, resisting affection from people. Because they really believe down deep, if you open yourself up to affection, that's when you get hurt. Or if I get hurt, I'm not going to seek comfort. I'm not going to seek people to care for me. I'm just going to take care of myself. And then I just can't trust anybody, so I'm going to avoid eye contact. If you've ever really tried to make eye contact with someone who just can't, who just won't, and you found yourself wondering, what could have happened with that person? There are all kinds of possibilities, but there usually is a reason. And sometimes the reason is, and this is what happens with lying sometimes, the person will think the only time I'm going to look somebody in the eye is when I tell them a lie, because then they can't know me. They just can't know me. I just avoid looking at people. Or I'm going to be a master manipulator. That's how I'm going to get what I want. That's how I'm not going to get hurt. So these are all these adaptations in here. Charm. I'll be charming if I need to be. I'll be very engaging with people, but it is not out of true love for people. It's just so I can gain power over them, manipulate them. Here's one that we see sometime with older children or young adults. I'm not going to trust anyone. I'm going to actually try and take care of my parents so that I'm responsible for them. That way I'll be the hero. And there are lots of them that we won't go through all of them, but those are characteristics of wounded children, adaptations, just to try and not get wounded again, because we will do anything to keep from getting hurt again if there's something we can possibly do about it. So the trick here is, how do we reparent this adaptive child? I mean, I find in my own story, it's the things that I do in order to not get hurt again. It's these adaptations that I've gotten so good at that just go into play, just unconsciously, that I've gotten so good at for all these years. So there's another way of looking at this, and I certainly don't specialize in this, but it's a big part of training and what we work with. years and years ago, there was a man by the name of Richard Swartz who developed something I'm sure you're probably familiar with or have read about it, internal family systems, or IFS. And so he was just trying to really be a pioneer to help us understand trauma. So these wounded or adapted or protecting parts, it's kind of like there's a family inside our brain, is a way to look at it. And this is very simplistic, but every part has a purpose. And it's all around protecting this wounded part of us. So I've just tried to do something really basic just to get all this on here. So he referred to this wounded parts of us here as exiles. And the reason I've colored it in dark and put downward arrows is that the exiles feel very burdened and very negative, like they're just carrying all the baggage. You know, they're neglected, they're pushed out, very negative, very heavy, heavy energy. And so we also have the protectors, and there's two different kinds of protectors. There's the managers. I'm kind of thinking about this like I used to try to explain to my children, like if you get invaded by germs, how the antibodies come in and rescue the germs, and I would act it out for them with the gestures and cartoon voices, and they would look at me and go, "Mom, you really don't have to do this with us. We really understand how we get sick." Okay, so these are like they rush in. Managers rush in, and firefighters rush in. These are the two type of protectors. And what we mean by that is that we'll take managers first. They're very proactive, and so they are all about preventing danger. So what can I do to make sure that nothing bad happens here? Okay, so you have proactive, and then you have firefighters over here that are very reactive. And so they respond when the bad thing, the dangerous thing actually happens. So when the manager was not able to prevent it, God forbid, firefighters rush on in. They kick in, okay, once the bad thing happens. So it's kind of like they're the paramedics. Paramedics are the ER, the responders. They're all about, let's get rid of this pain. So what does that sound like? Can we say limbic brain? I don't want to feel bad. I don't want to feel bad. Responding to the pain in the limbic brain, I want it to go away. So here we go into the exile. Oh, the pain is so deep. It is so dark. This hurts me so bad. And there's stuff that's locked away. And it's starting to come out. And we do not want to feel it. So we've got these managers and firefighters that are very proactive to make sure that hurt never comes my way. Firefighters come in from this other side, very reactive. So what do I do once a hurt gets through and that exile gets hurt again? So that's kind of the bigger picture of wounded child and adaptations. We're really busy on our insides when we get triggered, aren't we? We wonder why we feel so funky. We wonder why sometimes we don't even remember when we get triggered and all this stuff happens. So all this works to protect the inner child for a while. But you know what? When it happens within me, within an adult self, it's not healthy. This is going to cause problems within me and my relationships because it locks me almost in a prison when I'm trying to prevent pain. It prevents me from getting healthy because I end up creating more pain for myself. It's very self-defeating. So my job as a person in recovery trying to get healthy is to look at this when it becomes a pattern and to look at this with a person who can help me, which I do regularly, and then try to see what the baby steps might be in order to emerge from that prison. Because I want to heal my wounded child, that part of me. But then I want to learn tools to protect myself so I don't get wounded again. So I don't need these firefighters. I don't need these managers. I don't need these adaptations anymore. So that's easier said than done, because they really don't want to give up their job. They just really don't. They're very comfortable inside me. So the exiles are just the young part of us that was wounded by overwhelming experiences. We did not have the tools. I'm not going to go back through my life on this talk, but, I can tell you about experiences that were so absolutely overwhelming that I think this part just kind of rushed in during that experience and said, this is never going to happen again. All of a sudden there were armies around me, and that was sealed off for a long time. So part of us carries wounds and different memories and different traumas and different emotions, but mainly very negative ones. And that part of us feels very empty, lethargic. There's kind of like a depression, a feeling of shame, and we just want to numb it. We don't want to feel that negative stuff. So this is the burden or the memory when it took place. But the problem is within this, we developed a belief system. And if you start working with this, what you'll find is that it's a belief system that's mainly lies. Okay, we had to adopt lies to survive. So an example of this would be if a mom at some point said she had another woman over or something and says, oh yeah, I really wish I hadn't had kids either. Little one is listening around the corner. So the question is, how did that affect little you? And then what did you believe as a result of that? So there's painful emotions, there's rejection, feeling not loved, not good enough, but then a belief down there that nobody ever loved me, no one will ever want me. So what does the little child do? Goes into exile land, heavy, heavy, heavy load, hiding down in there, and protected by all of these other parts. So once in a while, the pain gets through. It's triggered by something out here. And those painful emotions come out in a rush. The lies come out. And the inner child can overpower the managers, the firefighters. So if you've ever seen just an absolute explosion of someone other than the person that you're looking at, and you think, what just happened here? When a person would get triggered, or within yourself. This may help you to understand. My governor just went haywire. So I'm going to try to begin to wrap up this first part today. It's just by, I think, looking at some of this with the perspective of respect. It says in the Psalms, for we are fearfully and wonderfully made in our complexity. And these are just simply representations and ways to begin to understand. But I think, seeing that we're not a mess. As people say, I'm a mess, I'm a hot mess. No, you have parts. You have beautiful parts. You have delicate parts designed to protect you and to preserve you. And as it says in Jeremiah, give you a future and give you a hope. And we have ways of understanding these. And what happens, and I can attest to this for sure, is that once the healing process begins, there is a beautiful innocence and a creativity and a warmth and a trust that begins to emerge out of the person as they begin to blossom and open up. Not always, because there's a willingness involved, and some people don't want to and cannot and maybe do not have the mental stability to recover, but there are so many that do. And this is such a wonderful beginning point to understand that you're in good company and that, you're made of some beautiful, tough, and resilient stuff, or you wouldn't have made it this far. So I look forward to being with you for part 2 again next week. Thank you so much for being here.